process. We need one more to start the hearing. So Chuck, why don't you go ahead and give us an overview of Senate Bill 177?
Certainly, Chairman and members of the committee. I'm going to share my screen here. Hopefully that worked. So Senate Bill 177 seeks to accomplish some major changes to the unemployment insurance program. First of all, you'll see that we are adding a council to assist the Secretary of Labor in carrying out the program. The first section of the bill deals with the membership and duties of the council. There are 11 members appointed by the governor to serve 4-year terms. 4 are selected by the Workers' Compensation and Employment Security Board's nominating committee, and 2 of those are to be representative of employers, 2 to be representative of employees. In addition, we have chairpersons of the standing committees of the Senate and House that customarily address employment security law, are members. The Senate President and Speaker of the House may each appoint 2 legislators, one of whom is a member of the majority party and one a member of the minority. And then the Secretary of Labor or the Secretary's designee is also a member. There's a provision that members of the council may receive compensation and expenses pursuant to the rules and regulations to be adopted by the council. And that money is to be paid from the Employment Security Administration Fund or any account of State General Fund of the Department of Labor. First meeting is to be called by the chairpersons of the standing committees of the Senate and the House. Then the council is to organize itself every year, select a chairperson, and meet as often as necessary to carry out its duties. The function of the council is set forth on page 2, lines 38 through page 3 of the bill. It is to examine and recommend changes to the UI system and the applicant claim process. The scope of that review includes technological infrastructure, system improvements, upgrades, methods of data sharing across agency systems. The objective there is to enhance UI system efficiency and system integrity. So also the council will look at forms of system security and identity verification and protection, and also seek to make the application or employer interaction with the department's programs on the website as seamless as possible to make it a customer-friendly experience. The council is specifically barred from examining the solvency of the UI fund or any changes that would increase or reduce benefits. The Secretary of Labor is to appoint an executive secretary. There are specific duties laid out for that executive secretary, including handling confidential documents, conducting research, making presentations or reports to the council. The council is limited with respect to access to confidential information. And the council may request testimony from the Secretary of Labor, Department of Labor employees, private sector employers, or employees. There is a requirement that the council issue an initial report within 6 months of the first meeting. Contents of the report are specified to include at least a description of the claim application process and planned improvements to that process. There are some duties that the bill lays out with respect to the Secretary of Labor regarding the council. So first, the Secretary is to post testimony and other material on the website, notify the council chair of any unauthorized access to department records within 5 days, and also notify the council of any disruption in the benefit application process. The Secretary is to develop a strategic staffing plan. In addition, create and maintain a list of all points of contact for use by applicants and employers and place on the department's website, again, trying to make the experience more user-friendly. Develop a process for the submission of complaints about service by applicants or employers. And the council is granted rule and regulation authority. Another major component of the bill is an upgrade of the department's IT system. You can find that at section 2 of the bill, pages 5 to 7. The intent of the legislature is stated as to continually develop and upgrade the system. There is a deadline put forth there. That's an important date. The new system is to be developed and implemented by the Department of Labor by December 31, 2022. And then we have a detailed listing of components of the new IT system as defined by the council in consultation with the secretary. There's a list in the bill. There are also the features and benefits of the new system are specified, again, as defined by the council in consultation with the secretary. There's a list of those features and benefits in the bill. The secretary's implement program integrity elements, follow the guidance provided by the Federal Department of Labor and the National Association of State Workforce Agencies within 60 days of that guidance being issued. And again, we have some specific program integrity elements that are specified that the secretary is to employ. With respect to the IT system, the secretary is required to utilize information cross-check programs. And we also have a provision here that granting authority to secretary to execute memorandum of understanding with other agencies for information sharing purposes. And again, rule and regulation authority is granted. The secretary is to provide an annual status update, progress report on the IT system modernization to the council and the legislative coordinating committee. Another provision the bill provides is to provide a little bit more information to applicants, especially with respect to tax information, so they're not hit with unexpected tax bills. So the secretary is to include tax information about the consequences, tax consequences of benefits on the claimant's initial notice of determination. That's at page 7 of the bill. Transparency is increased to this bill. We have a provision that pertains to the public posting of trust fund computations and data at section 4, page 8 of the bill. This provides that the secretary is required to post trust fund information, computations on the secretary's website. And that is to include data for each of the most recent 20 years and on an ongoing basis. And there are timeframes within which that information is to be posted. And also the information that is to be posted is specified at page 8, lines 20 to 38 of the bill. There are changes to the duration of benefits. As the committee recalls, the duration of benefits, unemployment insurance benefits are determined by the level of unemployment in the state, and those employment rate triggers are changed. That is at section 6, page 33. So you can take a look at that. There are a number of provisions for providing relief to employers based on the effects of fraudulent claims. As the committee is aware, that is a huge problem. It's one of the reasons why this bill is put forth. Just tremendous amount and level of fraudulent claims against the pandemic unemployment insurance programs have been a big problem. And so this bill attempts to address that. One of the ways it does that is to attempt to provide relief to employers. So there are a number of provisions in the bill at section 7 and 9 to do that. To hold employers harmless, to try and address effects on the tax rates that may come to pass because of the huge amounts of fraud, and also with respect to reimbursing employers that must reimburse the state when they pay out unemployment claims, to hold those reimbursing employers harmless and to refund them and not require them to reimburse the state for fraudulent claims. So those are sections 7 and 9. A number of provisions there to hold employers harmless. And some of these provisions also go forward on a basis, for example, instead of the general provision now that employers are not credited for a fraudulent claim until the claim is.
Hey Chuck, can we get whatever you're reading off of there from the revisers? Can you send that to us?
Certainly, I can do that. Yeah, I will send it to Michael.
Either way, that's fine. You can go ahead. I don't have that, and yeah, that would.
Is that not showing on? Is that not showing on the screen?
It's showing it on the screen, but it's just easier to have it in front of us.
Okay.
This paperless deal's not going to work if, it seems like we're trying to use the screens on the paperless, and it's better to have it if you had an iPad, or I guess you got to, but I still like the paper to be able to write on, and this is such a thick bill. So, yeah, it's pretty complicated. So, but that's all right. I mean, you can go ahead and keep going through it. If you
Okay.
can send it to Michael, then we can get it here in a couple of minutes when it comes through.
Okay, Chairman, I have sent that to Michael.
Go get some copies. Start with two. No.
So I guess I will continue then. I think maybe the proponents can address some of these provisions regarding holding employers harmless. One of the aspects of that is that the time limitations for an employer to dispute a claim as fraud are waived during the period of March 15, 2020 through December 31, 2022. One of the issues, of course, that we have heard about is that employers have had difficulty in responding to claims, to fraudulent claims in a timely fashion because of the volume, and also because of perhaps just issues getting the information in time. So this waives a time limitation. And then there's also a provision here that directs the secretary. This is sort of a separate provision dealing with reimbursing employer accounts. It directs the secretary to look over those accounts over the past 20 years. And if there were any accounts that have been charged as a result of fraud or an error, to go ahead and apply credits against those accounts. Another important part of the bill is attempting to deal with the issue of the depletion of the UI trust fund as a result of the pandemic, as a result of the claims. They're both legitimate and fraudulent. And this bill provides for reimbursements to the UI trust fund from the state general fund for improper payments. So the bill would reimburse the UI fund for improper payments made during the period of March 15, 2020 through December 31, 2022. The way this is accomplished is the secretary reviews federal information that identifies improper payments, and then also state information, Department of Labor information when it becomes available. And then within 60 days, certifies or identifies that amount, and then certifies that amount to for the purpose of making a transfer. The governor can also designate the transfer be from a state account other than the state general fund with the approval of the state finance council, if for some reason that would be pertinent. There's a provision that basically is intended to encourage the legislature to direct any federal pandemic related funds, any future funds, to the UI trust fund. And that's sort of just a statement of intent by the legislature. There's also a provision that UI benefit programs that are established by the federal government because of COVID-19 are not to be continued after the ending date by the use of UI fund contributions by Kansas employers. So no continuation of federal programs with state money. Changes to the rate tables. This is an extremely important part of the bill. I'm going to let the proponents, Mr. Hayes, discuss this aspect of the bill. He is primarily the one who created these changes in the rate tables, and they are significant changes, but I will let him talk about them in more detail. I will just note that obsolete language is removed throughout the section that deals with the rate table, so there's a lot of lines crossed out. We're removing some obsolete tables and other provisions. There's a fund that is closed. The Employment Security Interest Assessment Fund is closed. And then there are also new tables that are provided, as I mentioned. The bill makes some important changes to the work share program. Probably one of the most significant is the bill directs the secretary to create and manage a promotional plan for that program. And that is to include the promotion of the program with other state agencies, dedication of a department team for that program, development of presentation materials for distribution to employer groups and workforce investment awards, proactive outreach, engagement with employers who are an economic stressor or layoffs, development of an automated application, claims, and weekly certification process that facilitates participation by employers. Again, an attempt to make the interaction with the department seamless and user-friendly and encourage participation in that program. There's a provision that negative account employers may participate during recession. The secretary has determined if a recession exists, and then the negative account employer may be approved for one plan year during any 5-year period of time. There's an expansion of eligibility for the program. The limits with respect to reduction of weekly hours and are increased. They're expanded to make the program easier to be applied. There's a provision that an employee is not required to meet work availability or work search requirements, but must be available for the employee's normal work week. There are a couple of other provisions that are just kind of added into this bill. These are both from bills from last year. One is that services performed by a petroleum landman are excluded from the definition of employment under the UI law. The other is that with respect to organizations that lease employees and provide the personnel department functions for businesses, there was an issue that due to the law, they were not able to include certain principals, corporate officers within the quarterly UI reports. This removes sort of a restriction that those companies were facing dealing with that issue. That was also a bill from last year. If passed, the bill would become effective July 1st, 2021. And that is what the bill does, Chairman.
Okay, questions for Chuck. Do we have any questions? And if they're online, I will allow you to ask questions. You're just going to have to get our attention, and we will allow any questions that are online today because of the weather.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear
Senator
me?
Tyson, is that you?
Thank you. Yes, I do have several questions for Chuck, if that's okay.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Chuck, is it normal to have technical specifications in statute?
Senator, yeah. I mean, that's certainly a good point. Often those kind of technical specifications, as you're no doubt aware, are set forth in regulations. In this case, I guess the proponents wanted to maybe make them more hard and fast and put them in the law. That's the way the bill is currently drafted. But yes, that is certainly often one sees those kind of technical specifications in the regs.
I've never seen them describe the architecture to that level in statute before, and I have some concern over that, but thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd also ask on page 21 was the mineral rights issue. That's just clarifying that those employees are covered. Is that what that section is doing?
As I understand it, that is an exception. So we're carving out an exception for those services performed by a petroleum landman.
So they would not qualify for unemployment?
Correct.
I'm anxious to hear testimony on that. I'd have some concern over that too. Also, I would ask on page 62, the director, why is that section added, that new language on page 62 about the director of accounts and reports and the transfer of monies?
That is language, Senator, that is basically necessary to close out that fund. This bill closes out the the Employment Security Interest Assessment Fund, which, and so that language is there to just take care of the closure and abolishment of the fund.
Okay, thank you. And one last question, Mr. Chairman and Chuck. There's in the sections, and I understand what they're trying to do, but it obviously tasks the secretary with many items like review, reimbursing employer accounts. And I just want to make sure that can it be somebody appointed by the secretary? It doesn't have to actually be the secretary, or does that? Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Chuck.
Yes, Senator. So that makes the secretary responsible for that function, but certainly the secretary could delegate, to others to carry that out. It's just the secretary who's responsible for doing it.
Okay. Further questions? Do we have any others? Senator Stephan.
Thank you, Chairman. Just briefly, tell me how this bill came to be. Where'd it come from? Who started it? Who wrote it? Et cetera, et cetera.
Chuck wrote it, so.
Yeah.
Natalie, would you like to kind of address that maybe, or, yeah.
Natalie Bright here on behalf of the Kansas Society for Human Resource Management, and this bill is a collective work of the business community who has been monitoring the system and working these issues since the onset of the pandemic. And so we worked collectively to draft this language and then submitted it with legislator support to have the bill drawn up.
Go ahead.
I'd like to see a list of everybody who is involved in the input into this bill, please.
Any further questions? Not seeing any. We'll go ahead and start. We do have enough people now to have a quorum, so we'll open the hearing on Senate Bill 177. Proponents, Jeff Oswald.
Chairman Olson and honorable committee members, thank you for having us here today. As you probably remember, I'm Jeff Oswald. I testified here a couple of weeks ago about the fraud issues that we had, not just in Kansas, but nationwide in the unemployment system. Just kind of refresh your memory, we're we're a third-party administrator. My company, Unemployment Insurance Services, is a third-party administrator that represents employers throughout the United States in unemployment claims. My goal here is to kind of set the table for Phil Hayes to talk about some of the broader topics that we're going to, be discussing in Senate Bill 177. But to kind of give you an idea how we got here, it's been nearly 1 year since we had the initial government shutdowns, which led to hundreds of thousands of people being laid off through no fault of their own. The infrastructure which is managing the unemployment system was never designed to address the massive influx of claims that were created by the pandemic. The archaic nature of the technology only exacerbated this situation. So you had a volume and you had a quality issue going on with both the technology and just the sheer number of unemployment claims being filed. Claimants struggled very early on and still to this day with filing their unemployment claims and getting their proper benefits. In some cases because, employers were forced to furlough their entire workforce. If you're a restaurant, for example, you were shut down, you ended up furloughing your entire workforce. That created thousands of unemployment claims. A further hurdle to this problem was when the federal government tacked on the stimulus payments to each unemployment week of unemployment benefits, which created the necessity to have a whole brand new payment program tacked onto a unemployment system that was struggling to manage the basic needs as it was. So what you ended up with was a system that clearly needed to be modernized. It needs to be updated. It needs to be refreshed and give it a modern spin on being able to serve the constituents, and that is the people who are filing unemployment claims. As bad as this initial wave of claims was, the late summer and fall into the winter brought on a much more sinister aspect of this whole situation. That was the fraudulent unemployment claims. Motivated by the various pandemic programs, the $600, now the $300, et cetera, the PUA programs, the PEUC programs, bad actors took advantage of an overwhelmed system and began filing fraudulent unemployment claims. This was done by the thousands, and as we have shown, as we've seen now that the new identity verification system is put into place, it's probably much worse than we ever thought because they're stopping millions of attempts to file fraudulent unemployment claims. So without the benefit of those modern identity verification tools, the system was just incapable of preventing tens of thousands of fraudulent unemployment claims being filed in unsuspecting Kansans' name. Employers and employees alike struggled to report this criminal activity because really there was no method in place. So I think going forward, we need to be thinking about fraud as something that is going to be here with us for a long time. And all the while, legitimate claims that were being filed by people who truly needed the unemployment were getting lost in this volume of tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of fraudulent claims that were swamping the system. The cost of these two events, the pandemic and the fraudulent claims, has been very significant. Prior to the pandemic, the Kansas Unemployment Trust Fund had nearly $1 billion in reserve. It's unreal to me that just a month before the pandemic struck and we started the shutdowns, I was actually here with Phil Hayes and Natalie Bright and other people talking to different legislators here in the Kansas legislature about putting some circuit breakers into the system to stem the flow of tax dollars because we thought we were collecting too much. The true extent of this catastrophe is not known yet. We won't know this for many, many months, maybe even years down the road. But what is clear is that the Unemployment Trust Fund has been depleted, and it's going to need replenishment, and it's going to be needing some modernization. I believe that it's very helpful to understand the uniqueness of the unemployment system when compared to other labor programs. The unemployment system has a very symbiotic relationship which intertwines their interest between labor, business interest, and the government itself. At times, these interests obviously can conflict with one another. It's a confrontational program at times. However, I feel that it's accurate to say that all three groups understand the need for a healthy and efficient claims and tax model, and they also need we need to concentrate on being able to create a system that can bring the proper relief to the people who need it, and that is the unemployed people when they need it. Excuse me. My testimony on Bill 177 is going to kind of just focus on two things. I don't think there's anybody who's going to argue right now that the current unemployment system needs a drastic modernization. We need to do something with the technological issues that we have that are used to administer this program. It goes without saying that the KDOL and the claimants certainly believe that a modernization is needed as soon as possible. And the business community has been frustrated with certain aspects of it as well. It's been unfortunate that claimants have had to struggle a technological relic that was never designed to or intended to manage hundreds of thousands of unemployment claims being filed simultaneously. Those of us who represent the business community recognize and strongly support this modernization effort so individuals who require financial relief can obtain it in a timely and secure manner. Over the past 11 months, I've been contacted by clients many times seeking advice on how to help their employees who are struggling to get their unemployment benefits. The employers want these employees who have been impacted by the pandemic to receive their rightful benefits. The only request that the business community has is that the modernization process is done with common sense, foresight for the future needs, as well as completed in a fiscally responsible manner. We've spent millions of dollars over the past 3 decades, and we've had nothing to show for it. Businesses want to know that their investment in this very important program is being protected from outside influences and criminal activity, okay? The second important reform of this bill is to adjust the means in which the trust fund is financed, specifically to the application of surcharges. Back in 2015, we engaged in the challenge of reforming the finance model of the Kansas Unemployment Trust Fund. Prior to the reforms of 2015, an employer was faced with a system that had little to do with merit. Most of the employers of the state were maxed out at the 5.40% rate. And it had very little to do with what your impact on the actual unemployment trust fund was. The whole system at that time was financially burdensome and unpredictable. When, when we proposed to switch from the arrayed system to the fixed tax model system, there were concerns that would not sufficiently finance the trust fund. Our rather modest goal was to create a system which would maintain a fund balance without the need for surcharges, either a credit or a debit, 8 out of every 10 years. Needless to say, we were genuinely surprised at the success of this new model, which allowed for employers to actually receive a credit the last 2 years in 2019 and 2020, while still being able to fund the unemployment trust fund to nearly $1 billion. At the time of introducing these new tax tables, we underestimated the success and potential hazards of this finance model, both in terms of credit and replenishment surcharges. We are seeking to adjust the method in which these surcharges are applied so that they are equally distributed among employers based on their earned merit rate. We believe that these changes will adequately replenish the trust fund while keeping within the spirit of the proportionality that was intended in the 2015 reforms. Finally, I want to close with a message from the business community. I've never had a client of mine who objected to a claimant receiving unemployment benefits when these benefits are needed through no fault of their own. Certainly, we feel that it's vitally important to modernize this system so that the chance of a situation like the current one is minimized. We feel that the system needs to be efficient and expedient when payment of benefits is required. However, it's also very important to remember that the employers of the state ultimately finance the unemployment system in its entirety. There's a misconception that employees pay into the unemployment program. They do not. The system is entirely funded by the employers of the state through various payroll tax methods. It's understandable that the business community has concerns on how their tax dollars are being utilized. A modern, well-financed unemployment system will benefit all parties involved, and we believe that Senate Bill 177 will accomplish the goals of having a claimant-friendly system with a robust finance model which will support the financial needs of the unemployed. And on behalf of my clients and the business community, I appreciate your time, and I will now stand for any questions as you deem appropriate.
Thank you, Mr. Oswald. Do we have any questions for Mr. Oswald? I would hit you with one real quick. One of the things that it looks to me as a fairly new person into this is that we had a very functional system prior to our response to the pandemic, and then the wheels fell off. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, I think that in the normal course of business, the system that they had was able to be maintained and taped duct together to function perfectly fine. The analogy is that you might run a business and you have this old legacy database, and for what you do, it's perfectly fine. But if you're confronted with something that is unusual in your business model, i.e. a pandemic, it creates and illustrates the need for a newer system. And I think that's probably what's been exposed.
I appreciate that. I always try to refer to it as our response to the pandemic. That's where the problem came from. But with that being said, is there going to be a means by which you can prepare for a 100-year flood?
Well, I don't think you ever, as I testified back in 2015 about the finance reforms, you don't ever plan, I don't think you ever try to plan for a 500 or 100-year flood. I think a pandemic situation is unusual. What I think is more likely to be with us going forward is the fraudulent issue. The bad guys have figured out they can make a lot of money, and they're going to keep finding ways to get into that billion-dollar trust fund whenever they possibly can. So the modernization, in my opinion, is going to not only focus on being efficient for the claimants, but also protect the trust fund from a fiduciary aspect.
Thank you. Another thing that just keeps coming to my mind as well is how did these false fraudulent claims start and continue unimpeded for so long, literally until you came and testified, and then like 2 days later the thing was shut down? How did that happen, and how do we prevent that?
Well, I think it goes back to there's an old saying that, catastrophes don't happen overnight. They often are the slow process of, one little thing after another after another. And this is a 40-year catastrophe in the making. We didn't invest in the technology to improve upon it. And one of the biggest problems you had was obviously you didn't have modern identity verification tools attached to the system. And then, quite frankly, they were taking advantage of the volume of unemployment claims, and there was a lot of pressure, not just in Kansas, but in every state, to get the payments out to the individuals. So I think all these factors, not one single one probably was the one that made it, the situation worse or better. It was all these that created a situation where you hit critical mass. And I think you have to, all the states that are struggling with this type of thing did not put into place good identity verification processes to truly determine who was the person who was collecting the unemployment benefits.
I think too, they were trying to get the mass money out there, but, in, what was it, '08, '07, '08, we had, I gave some speeches on the Senate floor last year, how this was gonna be a mess, because we had about 850 million in the trust fund, and within a year, we were in a borrowed position of 150 million. We had a backlog of people. Secretary Brownlee always says I give her too much credit, but she really did clean up the backlog. There was a lot of money invested in this system. I'm guessing around 2000 to 2004, prior to when I got here, but it didn't accomplish what we needed to do. And, you know, we we got through the last phase, rebuilt the trust fund. Secretary Brownlee done a really nice job of getting rid of that waiting list and cleaned everything up. And, but we never really fixed the problem. And then all of a sudden, you have probably 2 to 3 times more than what we'd ever had back in '07, '08, hit the system at one time. And that's why if you go back and you can listen to them speeches on the Senate floor, I knew it was going to be a disaster. No one's seen the fraud. The fraud's new. I mean, there was fraud, but it was not at this kind of level. It was pretty minute. And I know, I believe that administration did a really good job of chasing the fraud down. And that's one of the questions I'm going to have for this administration is, what are they going to do to go and recover as much of that money as they can and get it back? I mean, I don't care if it's the low-level fraud. I want every dollar back we can get back. And I wanted them to do what the Brownback administration did and find as much of that money and get it back. I think what we're here today, though, is this bill is, and you can tell me, Jeff, this is to make sure from the business community, from all aspects coming together, that this gets done.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think there's a lot of concern about a couple of things. One, and two of them I already touched on, and that is, one is the fact that when the system was needed most, it failed. And I don't think any one person is responsible for that. It just is what it is, but the system failed. We were not able to get people paid in a timely manner. And a lot of that had to do with the technology. And the second thing is the fraud, obviously. But again, I will stress, we're not indifferent to the situation of the claimant. We're very conscious of that. But we also got to remember that the employers of the state are going to end up paying for it. And they want it to be done with some common sense, and they want it done right.
Well, I kind of look at this bill as putting a business perspective on modernizing the system and making sure it's done. I mean, I think, what'll come out of this, hopefully looking forward, is that we stay on top of this with some outside group like this to make sure the hold. I mean, I've been thinking about this a lot, and I don't know if maybe we need to redo the whole Labor Department organization and remove it from under the governor and figure out a way to make it more where it's not, because, I mean, we yelled last year and yelled and yelled and yelled. And, the media, I mean, I got hit more in the media, me and Senator Schoendrapp, for our yelling of the secretary failing to do her job. I mean, we had emails that high of claims that were not, they weren't getting back to people. People were tried for months. And you could go on their own Facebook sites and, just see thousands of people would comment negatively on them. how they couldn't get through or they couldn't get their claim. And, we want to work together here, but I mean, we've got to, there was a lot of money that was wasted because we didn't make this a number one priority last year. A lot of money that was lost fraudulently in this state because we didn't get on top of this. And I mean, we could have done dual, checking the claim. I mean, no more than having someone call that person back. And I know they'll probably tell you on the second floor that that would have taken the manpower. I think the problem is, we need to get these offices opened up. I mean, we've heard some great comments in here, but people need a place to come to get their benefits. We need to be checking on these people, make sure they're legitimate. When you find someone that's legitimate, then you've got one off the list that's legitimate. I mean, it's, I don't know. I'm embarrassed for the people of the state that needs this money because there's a lot of it got wasted, by fraudulent actors. And, who's going to pay for that? But if you go back, I mean, people were screaming and they were yelling, and the governor ignored the articles are there. Go back and look. And I sat on the special committee, and President Weigel brought in stacks of emails. So, other questions or comments for Jeff? Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
We'll move on to Phil Hayes. You got a little presentation deal.
I do. Good morning, Chairman Olson and members of the committee. Thank you for having me this morning. I did bring paper copies in addition to the emailed copy, so I'm a little bit older school. I like to take notes on my copies as well. So I thought I'd provide that, and some of the color references I think are going to be critical as we follow along. So again, Philip Hayes, I'm back in front of you today. Jeff and I were here on January 26th. There's additional information in that testimony if you were to refer back to that. There are other key points and kind of I felt like we wheeled in the big drum that morning, and essentially that's kind of what caused the commotion and ultimately ended up shutting the unemployment system down for 3 days from January 30th through February 2nd. If I'm being brutally honest, I would say that activity was probably about 6 to 8 months too late. And the tough thing for me to reconcile is that solution was added onto our legacy system at the end of January, and it's the same system that it was tacked onto that we had in June when we were beating the drums then. And I can just imagine how much fraud actually walked out of our state, probably out of our country, and we're never going to see that back. And as Jeff stated in so many words, the employer community is going to be the ones that are replenishing this fund. It does not give us any comfort to say that we're not going to be charged for fraudulent or improper payments or COVID-related claims. We may not be charged, but we're certainly going to pay for them as we walk forward probably for the next several years. So I'm here on behalf of my company, the Honor Group, but also Kansas SHRM. I've been a member of Kansas SHRM for 20 plus years. I've served in legislative advocacy positions. I've served as the state director. We have over 2,300 members throughout the state. These are employer groups, organizations, and HR professionals, really just trying to promote and advance the HR profession. And us HR professionals are in the middle. We're the mediator between employers and employees. So we're in a unique position to really kind of address both sides. This is a fund, this is a system that is funded exclusively by employer tax dollars, but yet the beneficiaries are our employees, those displaced Kansans. When economic hard times hit, they benefit from that. And we want a system that works for both sides. So I am here in strong support of the critical UI reforms outlined in Senate Bill 177. My testimony today is going to be a little bit unconventional. I'm going to walk through a few slides, maybe duplicate a few things that Charles said, but hopefully add some additional value there. The reform summaries are on my written statement, that kind of, I say, at the top 10 list, and we're going to walk through those. But I want to set the stage here. Absent from a spectacular miracle like the federal government forgiving all Title VII advances and making all states whole for any fraud dollars, I would just say don't hold your breath on that, as there's currently 22 states that have borrowed nearly $49 billion with a B dollars to date through 10 months of this pandemic, 11 months. That has exceeded the amount of borrowing that we did in the Great Recession, and there's a number of states that are likely to continue borrowing at a rapid pace. I just don't see the feds washing that away, and if they do, Kansas hasn't borrowed yet. We may be out of the woods and may not borrow, but there's still a degree of likelihood that we will. But if we don't, 22 states get made whole. How does Kansas get impacted, or other states that were responsible and actually tried to manage a responsible trust fund? So I would say don't hold your breath on that. The grim reality of increased unemployment taxes due to widespread fraud across our state is something that we cannot avoid. Kansas paid a staggering amount of money in fraudulent unemployment benefits over the last 11 months, likely leading to borrowing again from the feds in the coming months and possibly throughout the balance of 2021. Our state government needs to be accountable for that money somehow, and the bill before you determines if Kansas employers will bear that burden or not. And so at this point, I'm going to walk through my slides. I've been told that I need to keep it simple. I had substantially, probably double the amount of slides initially, but I peeled some of those back. So if anybody craves additional information, I would be happy to have one-on-one meetings or a work session with any senators that would like. And we can get a little deeper into the weeds, and I'm going to try to spell this out, that it's not going to hopefully lose us. Just a couple of questions that came up through Jeff's testimony. Senator Tyson had brought up the page 62 interest trust fund transfer. Essentially, this is sunsetting an old provision from the 2008 economic downturn and the provisions that the legislature, I believe in 2009 and 2010, put in place to basically put an additional surcharge on negative balance employers, and we had to have a collection holder for it. So we've struck a lot of the provisions that were time-bound to that recovery effort, and this is a holdover piece that we just need to relinquish those funds and do something with them so we can strike that information. Next, on slide 2, I've got weakening 123.21. It's a simple snapshot of what our claims look like. When Jeff and I came here at the end of January, we showed you an illustration of January 16th. If we fast forward 1 week later, our position actually got worse as a state in comparison to to our peers in the region, as well as other states in the nation. Kansas has less than 1% of the population, yet we accounted for 9.49% of all initial claims in the state for that week. The only state we trailed for initial claims was Illinois. They had 108,000 at 12.5% of all the national claims. California was at 6.1, and we know the fraud stories that are coming out of California. The national U.S. Labor Department is indicating initially through the pandemic that we were going to see 8 to 26 billion in fraud across the U.S. California surpassed 11 billion that they've accounted for. They have a huge backlog in the millions, and they anticipate that their state fraudulent spend is going to be 30 billion just for the state of California. The latest estimate that I've heard for national fraud related to unemployment through the pandemic is north of $65 billion for the nation. And so that's a far cry from what the initial estimates were. If you look at slide 3, this is the chart. The top piece of it has a red line. This is the national trend line for initial claims from January of 2020 through the end of January 2021. You'll see that Kansas on the bottom portion here in blue had a similar trend line at the front end in March when the pandemic really took grip and businesses shut down and employees were furloughed and industries were shuttered. But you'll see that our trend line varied significantly from the national trend line. You'll see in the middle part of the year, June and July, we've seen a slight uptick, and we started beating on the drum then that we've got some of these fraud claims, or what we highly suspected as fraud claims in the employer community, They didn't pass the smell test. They didn't look right. There's crisscross information. In August, Jeff has said repeatedly that school districts across our state, we're seeing hundreds of new UI claims. And that's just at face value. School districts don't file an absurd amount of unemployment claims at the beginning of a school year. You typically see those at the end of the year, and those districts also have reasonable assurance. So there's even a concern if it were at the end of the year. But you'll see when we started getting into the late summer months and going into the fall, I felt like we were on the kiddie roller coaster up at Worlds of Fun, and by the time the holidays hit, we got on the adult roller coaster and we started climbing the hill. And that's just an astronomical visual when you look at how Kansas compared to the national landscape. So if we talk about, how do we get here, Jeff alluded to, we have a legacy system that was born when the first Atari came out. So if you remember playing Pong in the mid-'70s, that's when the technology that we utilize at KDOL for our unemployment system was born. And we've just kind of put crutches and duct tape and Gorilla Glue on it throughout the process. And now our biggest vulnerability was not having that multi-factor authentication or dual factor authentication to verify somebody's identity. It was never really a concern for many states. In 2013, I believe, was our high watermark for the amount of fraudulent claims or fraudulent cases that KDOL investigated. We had 7 cases that we investigated in 2013. Kansas was part of a multi-state ring, some of the Midwestern states, and I want to say we were on the hook for about $9 million on that, if memory serves correct. But, at that time, we thought that was pretty big. I think that's going to be a drop in the bucket once all this is reconciled and we really find out what our fraud dollar exposure has been. So going on to page 4, this is a pretty big expansion in the bill before you, and this is really just standing up a modernization council. And I've said for years that, Senator Olson, you had referenced that in 2003, 2004, there's a fair amount of money, I think $25+ million that we got from READ Act dollars from the feds. The legislature appropriated a substantial amount, I want to say close to $30 million. But we had close to $50 million through the course of 2003 to 2011. And there was a lot of enhancements to the system that was really claimant focused. But the employer community was essentially kind of left in the dark, and there wasn't a whole lot that we got that was tangible that we would say was beneficial for us. There's no dynamic reporting. There was no integrity pieces in place. So the effort of standing this council up, whether there's a sunset provision or if it's indefinite, is to ensure that the appropriate stakeholders, all the stakeholders, come to the table and have a voice in the process. So this is bringing the business community who funds the system. It's bringing the claimant community who is the primary customer of this system. And we just want to ensure that both of these voices are heard because they've not been part of the equation up to this point. Obviously, having legislative oversight, having legislators sit on that council, and then a member from DOL as well. So there's a very specific focus that we would like the council to focus on to review and recommend IT upgrades and recommendations, and looking at that infrastructure used to file the claims and pay those benefits, as well as the overall customer experience. And what's unique about this, KDOL has 2 sets of customers, the employer group and the claimant group. So we want a dual focus there. Also recommend features to maximize responsiveness for all parties involved. Recommend methods for sharing data across the system related to UI compensation to maximize the efficiency. And then ultimately recommend methods to synergize user experience across all programs administered by KDOL. We go to the next slide, the modernization of the Kansas UI system. This has to get done. And I think some would say that maybe we were aggressive on the timeline that we established of having a new modern system stood up by December 31 of 2022. Different states have track their path forward. Some will focus on the benefit side of a new modernization system. Some will do the tax side. Other states have done a big bang and they've done it all together. And if we want to be aggressive on this, I think it's doable. But again, it's going to have to be a partnership between business, labor, and the administration or the agency as we move forward. So Senator Tyson, I know you had indicated in Jeff's comments too that, you know, do we need to have the technical components outlined in the bill? You know, and I've gotten some feedback on this that maybe we don't need to lengthen a statute and we can lighten this. You know, if we were to pull out those technical components and the technical features and benefits and leave it up to the Modernization Council to define, and that's how the language above those specific components and above the specific benefits are outlined there. So I think the language is there that if we wanted to pull out the detail, we can leave that detail to be defined by the Modernization Council. But do know that this was deliberate on the businesses community standpoint, that we wanted to be very prescriptive in here because we've been left out in the cold, no pun intended for today's weather, but the business community's voice has not been involved in this dynamic or this dialogue. So if you look, the bottom line that the business community is looking for on a modern system is a modern, reliable, and modifiable system with a huge focus on system integrity. This brings in the identity theft component or identity theft verification, the 12/31/22 implementation deadline. But to Senator Olson's comment earlier, this isn't a one and done. We can't do this and then put it to bed and go to sleep for 40 years again. I think we have to have a constant eye on this and ensure that we're not going to be left out in the cold again and really providing a disservice to Kansans in the greatest time that they really need benefits and service. So,
Yeah, I think one and done would be the biggest mistake because the fraud people are out there, and you know, you need to really have some controls in place and be testing the system every year or every so often, and there needs to be someone that has that oversight to see where it's failing and improve it.
to your point, the fraudsters are never going to sleep. In my opinion, I feel like the fraudsters are always going to be a step to 3 steps in front of us. And so if we just put this to bed and we're okay with it, I guarantee we're going to wake up tomorrow and regret that. So having some sort of, whether it's consistent or whatever that looks like, I think there's value in continued oversight in some capacity as we move forward once we get the new system up.
Well, I think you might, when you get a new system, there might be pieces you have to add as you go along before you revamp it or
Correct. I'm going to skip slide 6. This is just really driving the point home that, you know, this is not impossible. I think it is possible if we have the right players and the right partnerships at the table, moving toward a shared goal. So slide 7, notifying recipients of UI benefits of tax liability. And I did reference the page numbers so that the printout that Charles provided you can kind of follow along with his comments as well as ours. But this is, again, it's a service experience for me, for the claimants. The pandemic really got into kind of first gear, middle of March, and by the end of March, we were in high gear, and we had the highest level of claims we'd ever had. However, a lot of claimants did not receive a notice until after December 20th, so 8 months later, that they were informed that you will have a tax liability here, and you could have filled out a tax withholding form and completed that process, and you wouldn't have had a huge liability come April 15th on tax day to pay the state as well as the feds. Kansas, all federal unemployment benefits are taxable. Some states tax unemployment benefits, others don't. Kansas does. So there's going to be an April surprise for beneficiaries. We've heard the comments about the 1099s that went out. Some people never applied for benefits or got benefits, but they got a 1099 and now they have a tax bill due. Others, from KDUL's comments on a recent hearing, said that they withheld tens of thousands of 1099s and did not actually mail them out. And I think they're on record for saying that they will be sending letters to claimants that did not get or fraudulent claimants that did not get the notice, but their identities have been stolen or they've been victims of identity theft too. So this thing is really presented a pretty ugly mess, and it continues to spiral as we go forth. So we just want notification on the front end when the claimant gets the initial determination. Let's give them the option to opt in for tax withholdings. It's my understanding that USDOL has conformity requirements that will not allow states to naturally opt in claimants, so we have to get their express written permission. Slide 8 is the transparency and UI trust fund computations and data reporting. I've got 2 cutouts of a memo that is produced in the fall, typically middle part of October every year by the Kansas Department of Labor. KDOL was a great partner in working with the business community on the 2013, actually the recession reforms from 2009 through 12, but they were also an instrumental partner, and they were very cooperative for the big legislation in 2013 and 2015. We've just not had that same reciprocation through this piece. I know, Senator Stephan, you had asked who all was involved in writing this legislation, and I will tell you, Senator Billinger back in January had asked Jeff and myself, can we have a conversation? Let's talk about some additional credit tables because our fund is at $1 billion, and do we really need that? And so we went to work at that point. Then the pandemic hit, and as the problem began to come a little bit sharper focus for us, we kind of rallied, I say the old troops, back from 2013 and 15. And so we had the Kansas Chamber. We did surveys to all their members. We did local chambers. We had the Overland Park. We had Wichita. We had other community chambers across the state. We had the NFIB involved, Kansas SHRM. I felt like we were kind of the lead voice. Jeff and I carried a lot of the messaging over the last decade on this. UIS, Jeff is a third-party administrator on employment insurance services, so he brought in a national perspective, best practices from other states. We carried that forth. We engaged with Unemployment Workers' Compensation as a national advisory council. Doug Holmes is the individual there. We sought input there. I know I talked with Equifax throughout the process. This year, Opportunity Solutions Project came on board. But I would say the missing component, and we did reach out multiple times, is we invited KDOL for feedback. And I will tell you, Deputy Secretary Brett Flashbart was a great partner in the past, and he did indicate we do need to get together, we want to work with you. But I think that their floodgates were just so overwhelming with the volume of claims they were just trying to keep above water. And I certainly would have welcomed that perspective. It's nice from the House hearing last week, they essentially testified neutral. There's a lot of components in this bill or the sister bill to this one that they're proponents for or really like. But with this, this is overall on slide 8, it's kind of a snapshot of the distribution of employers, rated employers across the state, gives us indicators. We'd also like a little bit more information so we can help identify the predictiveness of where we're going with our trust fund.
We're kind of running tight here.
I understand. I'm going to run through here. Duration of benefits, that is kind of self-explanatory. We just want to run that with the national federal definition of 5% being full unemployment. Fraud charges and improper payments, I think there's a little bit of cleanup language to really get to the intent of that we want to look at just fraudulent and improper payments, not all charges throughout the pandemic. So any legitimate claims will be chargeable. The solvency piece on page 11, you can certainly come back and read through that, but Senator Stephan, what you had indicated, we had a system that was working well before the wheels fell off because of the pandemic. One of the provisions that we brought forth in 13 and 15 and that ultimately the business community compromised is we wanted a fixed table structure instead of letting the tables reset every year, and we got the fixed table. So based on our reserve ratio, our usage of the fund for our employer account, we earn our position, and that table now is fixed, so we can control our destiny based on how well we manage our claims. We wanted the surcharge or the credit charges also to be proportional with your ranking and where you fit into the fixed table structure. This was a compromise that DOL wouldn't budge. They wanted fully loaded solvency adjustments. I will tell you right now, as of February of last year, the top 10 best rate groups in the state account for nearly 65% of all Kansas-rated employers. And January 2nd, if this is not passed, the solvency adjustments, they will see an increase from 180 to 800%. The average between those 38,000 employers is going to be about a 500% increase come January 1st. The bottom negative 11 rate groups, the worst players in the state, not quite 3,200 employers, represent about 5.5% of all rated employers. They're only going to see a 24% increase. And so what we want to do is tie that proportionality. And I won't bore you with slide 13, but this is a color graphic. And you can follow my notes on the color-coded boxes there. This is what employers receive in the fall. It's our experience notice, and this will determine what our reserve ratio is, how we fit into the fixed table. We identify what our reserve ratio, in this case, ABC Company out of Smallville, Kansas, would earn a rate group 7, and their natural earned standard rate would be a 1.4% SUTA tax rate. If you flip to the next slide, this walks you through a simplified explanation of the difference of this. So talking about ABC Company, the very bottom here is if we adjust this, we're going to take that 1.6 full load that we have in current statute, take that 1.6 solvency adjustment, divide it by 38 total rate groups, and you get a variable of 0.0421. You take that times your earned rate group, so in this case, 0.421 times 7 gives us a 0.2947. Add that back to our earned standard rate of 1.4. Now we end up with a rate for January 1st, 22 of 1.69%. So that's the 21.05%. If we don't do anything, this company, and this is an actual legitimate employer experience rating notice, they will see a 215% increase next year. And so what we're trying to do is just bring proportionality back to that. I will say, I know Kansas Department of Labor will likely provide comment and later this week. They will likely say the same thing that they did in 2015, that this system is not going to collect enough taxes. I can demonstrate what we did in 15 and that the system was sound, and I can demonstrate again that it is sound. Jeff and I and the employer community was right a lot from 2015. In 5 years, we taxed employers less, and we still accomplished a $1 billion trust fund. And if we can replenish those fraud dollars and those improper payments, the employer community will essentially be held harmless. So slide 15 talks about some of those improper payments and so forth. Slide 16 is a work share piece. We just want a few technical amendments there. That's outlined in the top piece of my slide there. And then we just want better promotion of this program. It's an exceptional tool. The biggest sticking point there is we want to allow negative rated employers an opportunity to participate because it keeps people attached to their jobs, it keeps them attached to their insurance. But we can't let negative balance employers do it year after year after year, especially with some of the technical changes. They will actually drain the fund significantly faster in some situations. So item 10 is we don't have current language. We will be submitting an amendment for this, but it's basically just trying to make a two-way communication street between employers and Department of Labor. Currently, employers have 10 days to respond to employer determination notices, but if we submit a job refusal, it goes into the black hole. We don't hear anything. In fact, I tried to send my 19th batch of job refusals yesterday to the email that was working last year. I got a bounce back saying this email is no longer monitored. I tried the other one that's on the form that is produced and viable on the KDUL's website. I got the same kickback saying that this email is not monitored. So I feel like employers are out in the dark, and we cannot appropriately communicate job refusals and then hopefully maybe transition some of those people into job training services, et cetera. So in closing, I'll just say that we cannot rely on Washington, D.C. Kansas must take it upon ourselves to do everything in our power to protect our trust fund, our businesses, and our impacted citizens. Business as usual is no longer enough. It's time for new ideas and decisive action. It's going to take the combined efforts of KDUL, the administration, the legislature, and the Kansas business community. With record fraud levels and the increased risk of job-killing unemployment taxes on the horizon, it's incumbent on the legislature to exercise your oversight authority and be part of our solution. So with that, I'll stand for questions now or at the appropriate time.
Okay, we're going to say now's the appropriate time. We got about 10 minutes left. Do we have any questions? Stefan, you got it? Nope. Do we have any questions on the virtual? Any members have any questions? Wow, you did a great job.
Everybody's hungry.
Yeah, I don't see any more questions.
We got a statement.
Go ahead,
Thank you, sir.
Senator
I'm
Stefan.
gonna take you up on your offer. We'll figure that out after the meeting.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, who is this, Tyson?
Senator Tyson? Yes.
Yep.
Thank you. I would like to thank Jeff and Phil for all their work. I know they've been working on it. And also reiterate your comments that I remember during the interim committee, we also asked the administration to go with a spreadsheet, something as simple as a spreadsheet. I know California ended up doing that. I think the fraud cases would be so much more less than what we have. But this is a comprehensive bill. I appreciate your effort. I know it's going to take a lot of time to work, and we need to give it the attention that it deserves. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, we're gonna work pretty hard this week. We've got to get this budget out too. That's one other thing we've got to get out this week. But I don't know who's coming in tomorrow, but I would plan for tomorrow. We might have an afternoon session after. We'll see what happens on the floor, but I want to get this budget knocked out tomorrow, as well as trying to get, everybody through tomorrow that's going to be here, because we do want some time to work on this, but, we're running up against the window where we got a lot of bills still yet to hear, and, we got to work this bill. It's probably not going to be that easy. I don't think it's that tough to work. I think a lot of it's put in place already, but I mean, we're gonna have discussion, and so we want to give it the proper amount of time. But my plans is, since we lost Monday, and it sounds like we're gonna be here on Friday, is to try to work Friday. We're at that point in session where turnaround's a week away, and we're gonna have to use every day. So hate to do that, but, so is there any other questions? And I want to thank you, Jeff and Phil, for coming and putting this together. I've watched you guys for years, and you guys are really the expert on the trust fund that's made a lot of good progress over the years. The fraud deal, probably no one expected that, and that's probably the hole right in the middle of the trust fund, where it would be pretty strong right now, and several $100 million are missing because of, the fraud.
If I
Go
could
ahead.
just make one final comment on the fund control tables, you'll see there's a shift there. In 2015, that was built in line with the solvency standards imposed by USDOL. And that's kind of the middle ground, and where employers would like to kind of just reside in that standard table and not have a surcharge or necessarily even a credit. But as Kansas has grown over the last 5 years, we've added new employers, we've added new employment, and our total wages in the state have gone up. Therefore, our total taxable wages have gone up. So the new trust fund control table recalibrates that and puts it closer to back in line with US DOL conformity or solvency standards, and fine tunes those adjustment triggers, and it's self-regulating, and we monitor usage of the fund, benefits going out versus dollars coming in, and that is well regulated, and that's what we can get into on the detail. But that solvency standard schedule is built in to really be in lockstep with USDOL. Before the pandemic, USDOL solvency standards said we needed to be at about a $610 million trust fund to be considered solvent. The pandemic, depending on the outcome of claims paid, that may artificially be driven up, and we've got some mechanisms in place, but we think it's a responsible path forward.
Well, I think part of the problem was the Department of Labor didn't really create a path for people to communicate very well. I think that's been one of the struggles with the whole problem. I mean, when businesses need to reach them, you know, they need to be able to reach them on the other side. And since the pandemic, everybody's been working remote, and that just creates more struggles. Any further comments? We've got a few minutes to get into the budget. Should we go ahead and, you think you can get through this? Okay, let's go ahead and try to get through Commerce's side of the budget.
Good morning, committee. David Sofer, Legislative Policy Director from the Department of Commerce. Let me kind of go here really quickly.
We have 5 minutes.
Okay, no problem. We'll try to make it work. So really quickly, you know, I think in Dylan's presentation last week, he covered a lot of the Spark funding, which as you saw, kind of shifted the numbers in the budget with regards to large increases and decreases into FY21 and then FY22. So really quickly, in total, the department received $178,600,000 in Spark funding. In my testimony, you'll see the programs that were a result of that. In short, as of right now, the department has distributed $145.9 million. The reason why that there's a difference right now, the largest amount of outstanding funding relates to the broadband connectivity program. So with that, what happened is that broadband companies received a 50% share when they were awarded their project, and then as they continue to meet benchmarks, they receive additional funding, and then by the end of it, they will receive the outstanding funding. So we expect to be pretty close to $178 million after that, and I'm guessing there may be a bit of a clawback from the Recovery Office on some of that additional funding as well. One of the items I do want to highlight also is that we did receive additional funding for JCF as a result of some appropriation by the Legislative Budget Committee and the State Finance Council. So we did appreciate that. What that enabled us to do is when we mentioned to you at the beginning of session, we broke the record for $2.5 billion in new capital investment in our state. That's the largest in a single year. What that has done, so we have a program called Build Up Kansas. That is a $125,000 a year program with the Associated General Contractors. We've been able to put a lot of them to work as a result of that. All that capital investment means new facilities, building. In fact, if you go to Saline County right now, there's not an RV park to be had because of all that tremendous work. And because of all that new capital investment in projects. So that program itself is incredibly valuable. And also coupled with that, we've had a tremendous relationship with them, and they're doing a tremendous job out there. I know Mike Gibson, his team, tremendous work all across our state, being able to meet the company's needs with regards to building. I know we covered some of the tourism-related items last week, so I won't go into that. Otherwise, again, the budget's kind of pretty straightforward. There was not any additional new programming or anything like that, so I'll be happy to stand for any questions.
Do we have any questions for David on the budget? Do we have any questions for David on the budget? Senator Tyson or anybody? Not seeing any? We'll hold this, but next meeting we'll probably.
Chairman?
Yeah, Senator Tyson, you got a question?
Yeah, I do. If he could give us a breakdown on that $2 billion new money brought into the state, he could email it to the committee. That would be great.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Okay. When we get together next time, I don't know if this is something that we can pass or we'll get them comments to you. Can you get them to us today maybe, or?
Sorry, you talk about the list of the 2.5.
Yeah.
I'll get it to you right now.
Okay, and then we can get that out. And if possible, at our next meeting, I'd like to either approve this or discuss it, what we're gonna do there, okay? With that, we're adjourned. Thank you.